I'm the president of Ensign-Bickford Aerospace Defense, and it's my pleasure to have you here today in celebration of all the hard work that's gone into the Artemis program. And I'm going to refer to my notes because I like to talk, and and we have a 190-year history, and it says 3 minutes at the top, exclamation point. So the team knows me well. But yeah, no, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And the NASA programs that we participate in, specifically Artemis and others, require a significant amount of cross collaboration across 44 suppliers in the state of Connecticut, across many companies. So we're honored today to have NASA here, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, L3, Aerojet Rocketdyne, and of course, we are at Ensign-Bickford Aerospace Defense in Simsbury, Connecticut. So the purpose of this is to celebrate all the hard work and contributions, not only from our collaborative partners, but also the EBAD employees that have contributed to NASA space programs for over 65 years. So the facility that we're in today has been here for over 185 years. We've started back in Simsbury, Connecticut 188 years ago in 1836 with the invention of the safety fuse. And the safety fuse was all about that, safety. And so if you fast forward to today, we got involved with some of the original programs like Apollo, Mercury, Gemini, and we've been manufacturing explosive transfer lines, frangible joints for stage separation, flight termination systems, and the knowledge that the employees bring, the EBAD employees bring to the NASA programs is absolutely incredible and handed down over decades and from generation to generation. We are extremely proud and honored to be able to represent the company and to also participate in these NASA programs. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Marcia Lindstrom, the Strategic Communications Manager from NASA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to tell you, nothing is more welcoming to a Southerner than to learn that it's not Ensign-Bickford, it's Ensign-Bickford, and we like to say it like that, so that is great. I'm going to see if I can turn this on here. All right. So while we're loading up, I'll just say, first of all, thank you for taking time out of your day to come here to allow us the opportunity to personally thank you for the work that you've done that you did on Artemis I, that you continue to do for the Artemis missions. That phrase, we couldn't have done it without you, that gets tossed around all the time. In this case, that's actually the truth. We could not have done it without you, and we will not do it without you. So your role is absolutely critical to everything we do. Artemis I, as you know, is just the first step. But before we kind of move forward and push you guys to really look at going even further and not let rest on our laurels, let's just take one moment to reflect on our glorious laurels.
And here we go. Hydrogen runoff igniters initiate. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis I. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
We are all part of something incredibly special, the first launch of Artemis.
This view of Earth from a human-rated spacecraft not seen since 1972 during the final Apollo missions.
Distant retrograde orbit, we're going to be about 30
30,000 miles away from the lunar surface. We're going beyond anywhere we ever went for Apollo.
The Orion spacecraft is barreling its way back home after circumnavigating the moon and beyond in an elliptical distant retrograde orbit. Splashdown. Orion back on Earth.
How many of you saw that live? How many of you saw it the next morning like a reasonable human being? If you have not seen it, go watch it, because that is your work on display. It's not our work, that's your work, and you deserve a round of applause for a staggering success. I did it. Yeah, okay. Ta-da! I'll be here all week. Artemis I was just the first in a series of increasingly complex test flights and missions to enable human exploration of the moon and then, of course, on to Mars. It's just the first step, which is key. So on November 16th, 2022, 01:47:44 Eastern, I was there. We launched the Orion spacecraft atop the SLS rocket from the Kennedy Space Center, and we validated those systems for the first time. It was the first time they'd seen each other, and it was the beginning of a historic 25-and-a-half-day, 1.4 million mile journey to the moon and back. And in the beginning of that video, you hear the commentators say, "This view of Earth not seen since 1972. And then the next image you see of Earth is a view never seen of the Earth from the other side of the moon. Pretty incredible what we're doing. So it resulted really in an end-to-end demonstration of all of those systems and the ground structure, infrastructure that we need to do those missions, and you're an integral part of that work. So Artemis is really about three things. Science drives these missions. So if NASA isn't doing science, what are we doing? So the benefits of those discoveries and what we'll have with Artemis, it's hard to estimate what the payoff will be there. But if Apollo and Shuttle tell any story, then it's going to be incredible. The next thing is American leadership in space, and that's not about dominance. That's about having people join us the way with our values, free nations values. We have 40 countries now or more that have signed the Artemis Accords that say we will go with you, we will take the next giant leap in peace. And we need to lead by example, and they look to America to do that. That's number two. Number three is about inspiration. And inspiration, that sounds like touchy-feely, warm, fuzzy stuff. It's not. We are inspiring the next STEM workforce, the next generation STEM workforce right now, and doing audacious things, and the people who do those things will inspire all those bright minds to join us in this work, because we're going to need them, and I'm sure Ensign-Bickford would agree with that. So we need you to keep pushing to keep those standards of American industry up, in the 21st century, what we're known for. And then Artemis is also about, I said those three things, but it's really an investment. It's an investment in the American workforce. It's an investment in the American worker. It's an investment in you. And we need you and have to have you as part of this effort. And we need you as we have more partners joining the effort, both in the world, in the country, and in industry. You guys that have been doing it for aerospace, since Apollo, we need you to maintain and show folks how it's done. So you are critical to that. We have a great foundation to build on, but it's really just step one. And you're going to hear us say that 1,000 times, because as good as it was, is just the beginning. We are just getting started. And your work will continue to power us forward to the moon, and we need you to do that. So from me, and on behalf of NASA and the program managers that run these programs, I want to say a thank you. And then I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to try to operate this. Keegan, I'm going to turn this over to Keegan Jackson. Keegan is the liquid engines manager, resident manager at now L3 out in California. So we claim him, but he doesn't live with us. We send him away or orphan him, as he says, to do the good work and make sure we're accessible to L3. So, Kean?
Thank you, Marcia. And I live in Moore Park, California. You guys might know something about Moore Park, perhaps. Okay, so I get the privilege of talking about the rocket, but before that I want to say I really appreciate what you guys do. We appreciate it as a program office. So we go nowhere without what you do, and we go nowhere safely without what you do. When I think about, especially the flight termination system, that's a big deal, right? That's a system we absolutely have to have. There's no extra parts on a rocket. There is no appendix on a rocket. What you send with us is necessary and needed. If we have a bad day, that system is something we're going to absolutely rely on to be effective and reliable, right? So thank you for what you do, and thank you for going back to even the space shuttle days. I started my career in space shuttle and got to work booster for a while, so you kept us safe in those days, and appreciate what you're doing moving forward to SLS. All right, I get to talk about the rocket, and gonna do that by talking about Artemis I a little more. So this is at Kennedy Space Center, and the core stage of the rocket had just arrived at this point from Michoud Assembly Facility in Louisiana. And as Marcia said, this is the first time that the core stage will have seen the infrastructure at the Cape. Not only that, it's the first time that the core stage, which is built by Boeing, and then we've got 4 Aerojet Rocketdyne L3 Harris engines on the back. It's the first time that rocket will have seen the rest of its parts too. We didn't put it together somewhere else to make sure everything fit. We did it here in the Vehicle Assembly Building at KST, and that building is as big as it looks. It's got its own weather system, literally at the top of it. You can form clouds. We've stacked shuttle there, we've stacked previous programs there, a ton of history. And if we go to the next one. Okay, stacking the vehicle, starting with the Northrop Grumman boosters, which are 17 stories tall, 3.5 million pounds of thrust. And then after those are stacked, here comes the core stage, and with the 4 RS-25 engines, 2 million pounds of thrust. That's an adapter right there, and that adapter, whenever it starts moving, is eventually going to connect us to the in-space propulsion stage, which is called the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. But really, it's kind of like an upper stage that operates in space. And I'll go ahead and mention that once it was fully stacked, like we weren't done. There was a lot more work to do in the vehicle assembly building because there's avionics all across that system, right? There's avionics in the core stage in the center. There's avionics for the boosters on the right and the left. There's avionics for the engines. So we had to go through a ton of checkout processes to make sure that the rocket was talking to itself all the way across those systems. Everything powers up when it's supposed to power up. Everything has the continuity it's supposed to have. Just a ton of checkout work in this meeting right here. So you have a ground infrastructure team that's responsible for stacking the rocket. And then you've got Northrop Grumman with the boosters. You've got Boeing with the core stage. You have L3 Harris with the rocket engine. And you know how hard it is to work across a single company across lines. Working across multiple big companies, stacking a rocket, like it took a lot of cooperation and a lot of belief in the mission to push forward and get that job done. And they did an excellent job. Boosters, and then there comes our core stage, and here's the adapter next, the LVSA. And then this will be our in-stage propulsion element. There it is, with the RL-10 engine on the back, made by Rocketdyne. And then another adapter, and that adapter is going to connect us to the Orion spacecraft, which is the primary precious payload for Artemis I. It will always be the primary precious payload, right? And that is the Orion capsule with the European Space Service Module attached, which is that barrel section on the back end of it. And you can go to the next one, yeah. So at that point, we were stacked. And there's a good chance you paused it in just the right place. You can see our secondary payloads. They're kind of shoebox-sized items inside that adapter right below the Orion, black boxes there. And those were actually secondary payloads that caught a ride with us on the way to deep space. So those are university payloads, a few science ones from within NASA and from others. And there's not a lot of rides to deep space, right? So they had a chance to get 10 rides to deep space. All right,
Right there,
that's us.
that's
Okay,
perfect.
we're rolling out of the vehicle assembly building here. And that rocket, there was a plan for every second of its life. And as with anything in life, you better have a plan, but you better be ready for change. And we saw a lot of change. So we went through 4 of what we call wet dress rehearsals. And a wet dress is where you really exercise the whole launch team there and take that rocket all the way forward to the point of launch and stop. So you fill it with your liquid hydrogen, fill it with your liquid oxygen, learn all about those systems that are working together for the very first time at the Cape, shore up any leaks that you find, and then move into launch. The other thing we did, though, is we did dozens of launch simulations. I'm going to practice the team and make sure that we get it right on flight day. And then we were ready to launch. But your Atlantic Ocean here had different things to say to us. So first we had Hurricane Ian that came through, and we rolled the whole stack back to the vehicle assembly building, hunkered down for the storm, stayed safe. And after that, we rolled back out to the pad, and we were ready to launch, finally. Except there was one more hurricane, Hurricane Nicole, a Category 1 hurricane, and this time we weathered the storm on the pad, chose not to make that ride back to the VAB because that has a cost to it too, and made the risk decision, let's stay on the pad through a Category 1 hurricane. And that vehicle, that rocket, came through with flying colors. That is a beast of a rocket. And then we were ready to launch finally. So let's take one more look at that because we can't watch it enough. Solid rocket boosters last about 2 minutes, and then the core stage burns for about 8 minutes. Goes the abort system. So like Marcia said, that was your work, right? That was the whole world, like literally the whole world. That was not the United States, that was the whole world. We are the people that do the hard things to go to the moon, we still are. So that's exciting to me. It's exciting to me to think about how many people and how many companies are doing this together. So let's talk about how the rocket did. Like we say it did really well, but we can be specific. The engines there on the left, the core stage engines, RS-25s, so that's where I work, and I know they have sensors upon sensors. We have pressure sensors, temp sensors, position sensors, vibe sensors, every kind of sensor you can think of, and we know how that engine operates. And it was right down the middle. All of our predictions spot on. And then on the right side, the core stage, you see the orange section in the middle of the rocket, that had like 999 sensors, 45 miles of cabling, and spot on again. Next chart. Our solid rocket boosters, 3.5 million pounds of thrust. They're twin solid rocket boosters, one on each side, so you need them to operate exactly the same. And one good indicator of how well they operate is when they burn out. They burn out at about the same time. They burned out within 0.4 of a second of one another. So massive, 17 stories tall, burned out 0.4 of a second. All right, and on the right you see in Utah where Northrop tests the boosters. And despite what you might think, the Earth does not move when they strap that to it. It's fine. Okay, next chart. And this is the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. So after we are in space, giving the Orion capsule or the Orion spacecraft its one last push to the moon is the job of this upper stage. And the RL-10 engine on the back does that job. And one indicator of its performance is how accurate was it on putting us on the path to the moon. And it was 99.9764% accurate on its trajectory. Pretty dang good. Next. And this scares me to death. I'm a mechanical engineer and I think this is magic. But this is our software and avionics systems, and we practiced this stuff back at Marshall Space Flight Center in the lab thousands of times, run through the launch software, and software was spot on. Next. All right, so we say our rocket is tested, proven, and ready. But there's a lot more going on, right? And we're going to hear about the spacecraft here in a minute too, and how it performed over 25 and a half days. Next chart. So when we say there's a lot going on, just like you guys, we don't build one thing at a time, right? We're building lots in parallel. So Artemis 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way out to parts for Artemis 9 are in work right now. We've already delivered the core stage for Artemis 2 to the Cape. The boosters are at the Cape. That upper stage is at the Cape. We've got a couple adapters that are done, but they need to go to the Cape. So Artemis 2 is very real. And we should be stacking here in the not too distant future in the vehicle assembly building. That's the launch vehicle stage adapter. And there's the ICPS, interim cryogenic propulsion stage for Artemis 3. Payloads for Artemis 4. And this is a chute assembly facility, and that's where we really manufacture, or Boeing manufactures the bulk of that core stage. And that was an LH2 liquid hydrogen tank. And the core stage is 212 feet long, in and of itself, giant. All right, I will leave you with one last thought, and that is for SLS, for our ground systems, for the Orion spacecraft. It took over 3,000 companies across all of our 50 states. And that's people working together to do something hard for the betterment of humanity. And that's exciting. But the next thing that's America's rocket. That's America's space program. That's America's Artemis program. That's yours. So thank you for what you do. And now I get to turn it over to Matt Cox from our Orion team.
Good morning. It's great to be here with you in Connecticut this morning to talk about Artemis and Orion. I've got a series of videos here of the Orion mission, but I just wanted to talk for a minute about what your products do for this program and where they fit in. You know, Ensign-Bickford gives us many of the separation devices that fly on Orion, and what that means is, as you look at these videos and see pieces come apart, that's your devices that hold it together, most importantly, and then reliably separate it. I'm the director of systems and software. Obviously, these are mechanical components, so all our software does is tell these things to fire, and they fire, and that's incredibly important. Almost everything else on the spacecraft, we get to test it at the system level, we get to retest it, we get to know that what state it's in today before we launch it tomorrow. Whereas in the case of the devices that you provide, you build them one last time and you load them up, and then months or years later, when we send that software command, they gotta work, right? There's no checking it in between, so it's remarkable what you do and the reliability of your product and the safety. One of the things that amazes me most about what you provide is when you look at the spacecraft right here along the separation plane between the top half, the silvery part, the crew module, and the service module. That's the very top of the stack, and that's held together by 4 Ensign-Bickford separation bolts. That's it. The whole thing, all the way, that rocket, all the way from bottom to top. We got astronauts sitting in the top, and what's holding them to the ground is 4 bolts that you provide for us. So thank you very much for your contributions to the program and the incredible performance of your hardware on Artemis I, and what we know will be incredible performance going further with Artemis II. So having said all that, let's take a look at some videos. As you saw, we got a great ride off the launch vehicle, and we headed out to the moon with Orion over 4.5 days. We did an outbound powered flyby of the moon and then cruised alongside it for about 2.5 weeks in between, and then we caught up to the moon on the back end of the mission, did another flyby, and that set us up on our return trajectory to bring the spacecraft back in 25.5 days later out off the coast of San Diego. So you see some of the numbers here with the distances and velocity. We did go about 35,000 miles past the moon, which is further than any human rated spacecraft has gone previously. And Ideally, we won't go that far out on the upcoming missions. We'll go into lunar orbit and stay there. But that was important for us to get the energy we needed to verify all the systems, including the heat shield, on the way back in. So that's a top-level view of the mission. We go on to the next video. So this is fairing separation, all Ensign-Bickford hardware that initiates this. When we look at some of the earlier views of the spacecraft, we provide the fairings that cover up that service module. There's 4 of them around the spacecraft. And we have ETLs and other separation devices that you provide for us that perfectly kicked off those 4 fairings in one of the first separation events that we had during the ascent stage up at the Orion spacecraft at the top of the stack. Next slide. Next hardware we had to generate was the jettison was the abort system. At the very top of the stack, you likely see a small rocket up there. We never want to have to use that. Its purpose is to get the crew away from the rocket in the event of a bad day on the launch vehicle side. But we have to get it out of there in any case. So in a nominal ascent, we have a set of jettison motors on top of the spacecraft on that last, and those fire, again, 4 release devices that you provide for us that separate that from the spacecraft, and it flies away. And then we just got the Orion spacecraft still attached to the ICPS at that point, but going through the final stages of Earth ascent and getting into the low Earth orbit phase. Next slide. The solar array wings for Orion are provided by our partners in Europe. The whole service module is provided by the European Space Agency. We have 4 solar arrays on there that are built in various countries. They actually have thermal knife separation devices on them, which are different than what you do. It's funny, I look at that mural you have, you chose to put a GOES-R spacecraft as your spacecraft back there. I worked on that for 5 years of my career and know that you deployed the solar arrays for us on that one. And in this case, we have European hardware, but we had, believe it or not, GoPro cameras out on the tips of the solar arrays, upscreened for use on this mission, and all of the video that you see in the pictures are from those GoPro cameras, mostly out at the end of the solar arrays. So we had successful deployment of all 4 solar arrays, and then that set us up to do our separation from the ICPS that you've heard about. And then shortly thereafter, you see the puff come out of our 800-pound engines at the back end of the spacecraft, built by Aerojet for us. But at this point, Orion was on its own. We had exited Earth orbit, coming off the ICPS, and began that transit out to the moon that you saw in the video at the start of this series. But again, another perfect separation event with the high reliability hardware between Orion and the rest of the stack. Next slide. So this is the outbound powered flyby. You see the Earth down there in the lower right-hand corner. This is us going by the moon. These are GoPro cameras, but this is really a spectacular view of Earth set as we were going around the moon for the first time. It's interesting on any missions like this where the sun angle plays so much into the quality of the video that you get. So in this case, we're kind of backlit and you get a fully lit moon. And as we lose sight of the Earth on the cameras, we also lose sight of the Earth on our antennas. So at that point, the signal cut out. So we don't, for us, it's a dark period on the other side of the moon, and we're anxiously awaiting for the spacecraft to come out on the other side and reacquire the RF signal, and in this case, everything went perfectly. Next video. And this is now at our furthest distance from the moon, looking back, just a really spectacular picture of the Earth and moon aligned with each other, lit off the side with the spacecraft and all of its selfie glory there out by the moon. And then this is our last trip around the moon before we came back in. In this case, it's Earthrise, completely different lighting. This is my personal favorite picture of the trip, with just the texture that you see in the craters with that backlight and the flare. And this was a morning about 5 days before we landed. We launched shortly before Thanksgiving. We went through the Thanksgiving holiday, flew this mission, and now we're getting down close to Christmas when it came back in. So all of us had a great holiday season watching this mission tick off back a couple years ago. And then re-entry. We didn't get video, unfortunately, of that crew module, service module separation, which again was your 4 devices that made all that happen. But separation had happened a little while prior to this video. That this is sped up, but this is from the camera in the crew cabin. We had our zero gravity indicator in the lower right-hand corner, Snoopy, who's tightly leashed to the spacecraft, and he felt gravity again for the first time in 25 days here. But this is, from the second row of seats in the crew cabin. We have 4 seats inside Orion for the crew. This is the back row, but from this view you can see the plasma effects lighting up the exterior of the spacecraft. And then the next video that we've got, we can jump forward. We'll just let this play out. So this is just incredible plasma artifacts going around the spacecraft. You see the horizon line at times tilting back and forth. That's the guided re-entry of the spacecraft. It rolls itself back and forth and sets the lift vector of the heat shield where we want it in order to control the altitude of the spacecraft, and as we come back in and make sure we land exactly where we want to. The black particles and such that you see, that spacecraft is all shiny and silver in some of the earlier pictures. That's tape that we put on it that we need for thermal control during the deep space phase of the mission, but we don't need that for re-entry. So a lot of what's happening here is that tape is burning off, and we see us in landing here in a little bit. It's a black spacecraft. It's not a silver spacecraft anymore, and that's from all that silver tape coming off. So here we are, having made it through re-entry. We've got 8 parachutes. The first 3 pull away the top cover of the spacecraft. That happened rather quickly in this video. These second 2 are the drogue chutes that slow the spacecraft down and stabilize it. And then they get cut off, and then the 3 main chutes deploy. And then that's our final device for soft landing all the way down in the Pacific. And there we go. Really incredible morning for us. We all got to watch it out in Denver in the gymnasium, so it was kind of an old school event. I grew up here on the East Coast and remember gymnasium events, and we got to do one out in Denver. But again, I can't emphasize enough the reliability of the hardware that you provide. It's really the only items on the spacecraft that have no choice but to work perfectly at that moment in time, or else we're in bad shape, and knowing that we can trust you to do that for us on Orion, and I'm sure the other elements, is incredibly important. So thank you for that. Thank you for having us here this morning, and thank you for supporting the Artemis program.
All right, so now we mentioned a couple of times, even as glorious as that was, and I will have to say, Matt, our job was done in, well, most of it was done in 8.5 minutes, and then an hour and a half later, and we were out the door, and these guys had 25 and a half more days to go. So I think we got the good end of that deal, but it was a spectacular mission. So now I have the privilege of introducing to you somebody who knows a little bit about this stuff from the user end, and he's going to talk us through future missions, but let me do him a proper introduction. So Captain Lee Moran, he's a United States Navy captain and an accomplished NASA astronaut with 259 hours in space. He has degrees in biochemistry, medicine, and microbiology, and last night I learned at dinner that 10 years ago he decided to get a master's degree in physics. He shoots low. I don't understand this man at all. So he has all of that, and he may be among the very few people who has wings of gold as a flight surgeon. He was a dive medical officer, and he was a submarine medical officer, so he also has dolphins to go along with those gold wings. He made significant contributions to STS-110. They put together this S0 Trust to the International Space Station, which allowed them to do work for the first time out of the Quest airlock. He currently is assigned to the NASA Exploration Branch, and he's supervising the development of the cockpit for the Orion spacecraft, including the crew interface Rapid Prototyping Lab, or RPL, Captain Morin.
It's a great privilege to be back in Connecticut this week. This is where my Navy career began. My first command was down in Groton, Connecticut at the Naval Undersea Medical Institute, and I became a submariner and was involved with building a new construction Trident, the Henry M. Jackson, and was on the pre-commissioning blue and gold cruise of that, and then went on to aviation. But this is where my Navy career started, right here in Connecticut, so I'm very glad to have a chance to come back. We want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing now that we have a Artemis vehicle and Orion spacecraft built. You go to the next slide. Let me introduce the crew that's going to be flying on the next Artemis mission, Artemis II. These are a very distinguished crew. Starting, we have Christina Koch, who is a electrical engineer from Michigan. She currently holds the record of the woman who has the most time in space, over 300 days in space on the International Space Station. Next to her is Victor Glover, called sign Ike. He is a Navy F-18 pilot. He's also had time in space, and he also will be the pilot on the Orion Artemis II mission. Next to him, you have Jeremy Hansen. If you look closely, you'll see his shoulder patch has a Canadian flag, so this is an international mission. Jeremy is a Canadian F-18 pilot with the Canadian Air Force, and this will be his first flight in space, and he will be the international representative on the first Artemis crewed mission. And finally, we have Reed Weissman, who's also a retired Navy captain, and he was previously head of the astronaut office, and he'll be the commander of the Artemis II crew. And this crew is already deep into their training, and one of the activities I'm involved with is providing the simulators that they will train on. And in fact, we have a display called EPS Pyro, and that is the display of how the things that you guys make look to the crew. And that's where they monitor those pyrotechnics firing. And I can tell you from the training that I've had and the experience I had, the word is that the pyrotechnics will work. And now some of it you only use in an emergency, and some of it you must use in every mission. But whatever it is, whether it's an emergency system or a nominal system, the reputation of your products is that those are just going to work, and they're the most reliable things on the spacecraft. And that's not an accident. That happens because of the attention to detail and the care of attention to your jobs that all of you do. And so I want to thank you on behalf of our crew and also myself, because our lives depend on your attention to detail and that continued excellent reputation that you have for reliability and performance. Next slide. I always get chills when I see that, even though I've seen it a few times. The key point is that we're just getting started with this program. We had the Artemis I mission, which set the stage for putting people on the next trip out to the moon. Artemis II, you've met the crew, and we've talked about that mission a little bit. But there are subsequent missions, as you see here. And it goes beyond Artemis V as well. But Artemis III will be the first time humans will land back on the moon. And the Orion Artemis III capsule will be part of it that takes the crew out to deep space and brings them safely home. Then subsequently you have Artemis IV. That will involve a new component called Gateway. Gateway is like a small space station that will be out around the moon in a very exotic orbit, and that will be a way station. So the Artemis Orion vehicle will dock to the Gateway, and then the landers will be on the Gateway, and the crew will go from the Gateway down to the surface of the moon, and we will start building up infrastructure and capability at the south pole of the moon in subsequent missions. And you can see Artemis V, there'll be a rover on the surface of the moon to extend the crew's range. And each of these missions builds on the previous one and builds up infrastructure in space to set the path to go return to the moon and then go on to Mars. So it's a whole series of systems that build on each other. And your pyrotechnics are going to be on every one of those components. Next slide.
I believe
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah. Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Moore. And I know we're pushing time, but we would be remiss as NASA if we did not invite our prime contractors who do the work directly with you all that we count on to join us up here for a few comments. So I'm going to call them all, and I'm going to let them jockey for who gets to go first. But if I could have Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman representatives step up here, I'll turn the mic over. And then we have a few things for you guys.
Good morning. My name is Joe Hobbs, and I'm the supply chain business manager for all core stage parts that you can see up here. We've also got all the major tooling, supply chain activities for the math, everything that builds the part. I love what I do. First launch, I was at home in Huntsville, Alabama. Had just relocated, 20-year career, defense programs, which are dear to my heart. I love them. Relocated to Huntsville to support a major defense program. Saw the launch, and in February I had a desk managing core stage supply chain. So super stoked, very excited to be part of this. I've worked with Ensign-Bickford in the past. Love you guys, love what you do. Your commitment to quality, continue to collaborate with us, help us overcome problems, help us be as good as we possibly can be. Very just grateful again for this opportunity to be here today. So on behalf of Boeing supply chain and broader Boeing and our customer, thank you for what you do.
My name is Justin Banshee. I'm also here on behalf of Boeing supply chain. I have the privilege of living and working in Cape Canaveral. So all those videos that Keegan was presenting, I got to see firsthand. So it was, it's really cool. It makes it feel normal how often those things kind of happen. So I think it's very important to take a moment in time like we're doing today to realize how uncommon they are and how very important every contribution we are doing is. So just want to take a moment and say thank you very much.
Hey, good morning. My name is Jamie Villata. I am the Flight Systems Manager for Boeing for SLS program. So what does that mean? My team is responsible for all of the avionics that go on the core stage. So we interface, near and dear to my heart are your safe and arm devices that you build. So, and that is one of the reasons why we do what we do. Just real quick story. I got to sit on the console, and I say that, I tell people I was on the console in Huntsville, so I was the B team. So, so with that being said, you heard Keegan talk about a lot of wet dresses, and we had scrub launches and things like that. So the night of the launch, the morning of the launch, we had been there before, and we're like, all right, we're not launching, and then all of a sudden, Air Force comes on and they start doing their checks. And we hadn't gotten that far before. Air Force had gotten on to do their checks of the flight termination system that my team is responsible for. And then when they get through those checks, they're checking out your safe and arms, they're checking out my avionics systems, and they're checking out all of the termination systems on the vehicle. I said, we're really going to do this. This is the day. And sure enough, it happened. So, and that was just an attribution to your great work. So thank you so much, seriously, personally, and thank you from the Boeing company.
So I'm John Youngberg. I'm with Northrop Grumman. I'm the manager of supply chain programs over NASA as well as the Air Force programs. And I know we've got Ensign-Bickford all over the rocket, right? The flight termination system for us, also in consideration for work on our Belay program. Then you're also on our Sentinel program as well for the TBIs. So really appreciate all the great work you guys do. Darren Schofield's one that I work with closely. I know he's the procurement rep with you guys, and Colin French, one of our program managers as well. They wish they could be here, but you get me instead. But thank you for your hospitality. And again, thanks for all that you do.
For us at Lockheed, we really value the reliability of the product you deliver. We also really value how well you work with us when we do encounter engineering challenges. I think you might know that every once in a while we get some results that we don't quite expect. And then you're always right there with us to help solve them. You know, for me personally, I'm really happy to be back here in Connecticut. I spent a couple of summers building helicopters back in college down in Stratford. So really value the Northeast contribution to aerospace and certainly Connecticut's. But we got a lot of your hardware stacked up for these future missions, and we're looking forward to more. So thank you for hosting us today at this great event.
And Matt, you two, come this way. All right, so and if we can have the lights change just a little bit real quickly, because we came here for you. It may look like we wanted an audience, and in fact, somewhere where we visited yesterday said you guys wanted an audience, and I said, no, we didn't. We wanted to say thank you for what you are doing, what you have done, and what you will do, and continuing to do it with the rigor with which you obviously do it. So it is about you, and at this point I'd like to ask our NASA folks to come back up. We've got a couple of things to share with you all. And Lisa, I think you're receiving. So I'll let y'all fight over who reads. Reading in public is easy, math in public, whole different thing.
All right. On behalf of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, I am pleased to certify that the following items were included on the flight manifest for the Artemis I mission and flew in the official flight kit on board the Orion spacecraft. In accordance with agency policy, these items are now being returned to you. Artemis I launched on November 16, 2022 and splashed down on December 11, 2022. This was the first uncrewed integrated mission of our new deep space exploration system. Orion, with its European-built service module, launched atop the Space Launch System rocket from Launch Pad 39B at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The Artemis I mission tested the system's capabilities to orbit the moon and safely return to Earth. Orion traveled 19,908 miles further than the Apollo capsule, 43,051 miles beyond the moon, and 268,563 miles from Earth. The success of Artemis I is a critical step in the nation's return to deep space, human exploration to the moon, Mars, and beyond. So thank you on behalf of all of us for what you're doing.
But wait, there's more. So now we're going to put that to the side just for a second. We need you guys to come back up here and join us. Chad, if you want to come up here and join us. This one's about you guys, for sure. And it's just a final way of kind of reminding you what we're doing. And the fact that as it unrolls, it'll be a sentence you'll be sick of hearing before we leave. And let me just say, Ensign-Bickford, I enjoy it. You may not can see because of the tables, but at the bottom it thanks you for the work that you're doing and says we are just getting started. And you know what looks super good on that banner? Your name in silver Sharpie. Because whether you're at the beginning of your career, the middle, or the end, your timing is awesome. Because you're right here, right now, doing this work. And we thank you so much. Woo! Because these people, well, except for Lisa and Chad, these people aren't that important. You guys are very important, and we're going to ask them to do a little pivot and turn around. We want you guys to stand, and we're going to try to get a picture of you all with the banner in front of you. So.